Good evening and welcome to the third debate of the League of Women Voters this year. And this is the Board of Estimation and Taxation. We still have one more town clerk, October 25th. So we really are excited, actually I am, to see all of you in the room. Real human beings, not just on Zoom. And I actually recognize some faces, so it's very, very nice to have you. And I have to say, I do this, but a lot of people work hard to put on these debates. So I am going to quickly mention some names. Our president, Sandy Waters, over there playing with the computer. Helene Weiner was our registrar. We have timers, Kath Bergwiger, Lynn Gerlich, Chris Lowe, and Nancy Duffy. And we have always the town staff, Horst Trebbe, he's in the technic room, Don Conway, John Thompson, Steve O'Hurley, and Tammy Warren. And of course, Elizabeth Butler, who's my aide de camp, wherever she is working. So our moderator tonight is Kay Maxwell. Kay has done this so many times, I can't tell you, and I really, really appreciate her help over the years. And she is the past president of the CT League and the National League, and she lives in Stamford. So she has no skin in the game who wins in Greenwich. And the League is recording this debate, and we will have it up on our website within a day or so, if you want to listen to it again and again and again. I know a lot of you will. So I would like to say there's a good crowd here tonight, so I'd like you to sort of keep it down in terms of applause and yelling and screaming and cheering, because we are here to listen. And the final thing is, we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We've been around for over 100 years, and we really do look on voting as a fundamental right in America. And we really want to try to empower Greenwich citizens through our education efforts, like this debate tonight, to be more informed citizens and voters. So now we're going to actually show a video that describes what the BET does. Go, Sandy.
Hey everyone, I'm Hagar Shamali and I'm here to tell you that it's an election year. I know what you're thinking and you're like, no, oh my God, not again. Yes, again. In Greenwich, municipal elections happen in all odd-numbered years, just in time after you've recovered from the last hoopla. In the past, less than 50% of registered Greenwich voters participated in our local municipal elections. So you thinking of skipping this year's election? Think again. We need to vote in our local elections because it's how we get decision makers who literally influence our daily lives here in Greenwich. This year, the town's powerful financial board, which is called the Board of Estimate and Taxation, also known as the BET, will be elected for 2 years and 2 budget cycles. The BET controls all town spending for every town department. So for example, do you own a home? Well, the BET controls the mill rate and your property taxes. Do your children attend a public school, or maybe you feel like the school needs upgrades? The BET controls all capital spending in the school's budget. Or are you frustrated with waste or penny pinching in town spending? The BET sets the town operating budget and borrowing policy. Okay, so clearly I've convinced you to get out and vote, but how do you vote for the BET? Well, it's complicated. Democrats nominate 6 to serve. Republicans nominate 6 to serve. Unless there's a primary, all 12 nominees will be seated. It's a real nail-biter. On the election day ballot, unless you're involved with a political party or there's a petition candidate you support, you have nothing to say about who will sit on the BET. I know I'm really convincing you right now. What you control is which party has the most votes to pass its agenda. And the political party whose candidates receive the most votes in total chooses the BET chair. And that person has a tie-breaking vote. So one more time for the people in the back. The political party whose candidates receive the most votes gets to choose the BET chair. And that person is really important because they have a tie-breaking vote. I am not here to tell you which party to vote for. I'm just here to tell you to get out and choose one. Now, I know this is a small town, and you might know people running, but this is not a vote for high school president, so make sure to learn about candidates' policies and vote for the people whose policies you support. So quickly to summarize. First, get out and vote. Second, get out and vote. And third, pick me up a coffee along the way. In October, the League of Women Voters of Greenwich will publish a voter's guide on their website, and it'll include all the information you need on the candidates and voting. You can also follow the League of Women Voters of Greenwich on Facebook, and me at Hagar Shamali on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll make sure to share and link to the guide and remind you to go vote. In the meantime, get excited to voice yourself and make your opinions count.
So now over to Kay.
Thank you, Becky, and welcome, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening in person as well as via Channel 79, YouTube at Greenwich Community Television, or via Zoom. These debates, as I think has been mentioned, are also being recorded, and they will be available at lwvgreenwich.org. Now, our purpose this evening is to provide you with an opportunity to hear the views of the Democratic and Republican candidates running for the Greenwich Board of Estimate and Taxation. Participating in this evening's debate are 6 Republicans and 5 Democratic candidates. One Democratic candidate was unable to be here this evening because of a business commitment. Now, members of each party are seated together, and based on a drawing ahead of time, a Democratic candidate will be the first to respond to the first question and the first to deliver closing statements. Now, the format is designed to allow time to discuss the issues. The only rule is that the total time used by each party, not each candidate, but each party, by the conclusion of the debate be approximately the same. The questions are going to be posed this evening by Greenwich High School student Jack Howes, but the questions themselves have come in advance from the public. The candidates are not restricted to 1 or 2 minute responses. Instead, they can spend as little or as much time as they feel is appropriate, within reason, of course, to discuss each issue. The parties will take turns being the first to respond to a question, and the order of their seating within each party was decided by the candidates themselves. Following the question period, 3 candidates from each party will make a 2-minute closing statement. As was mentioned, members of the League of Women Voters are serving as timers, and they're going to keep the candidates and me informed at all times of the amount of time used by each party. Obviously, if there's a serious imbalance in any way, I'll see that it's corrected, and we will move on. And so, it is now my pleasure to introduce the candidates for the BET. To my immediate left are the Democratic candidates for the BET. They are, left to right, Leslie Moriarty, Stephen Selbst, Matt Deschamps, Elliot Alchek, David Weisbrod, and Scott Kalb is the candidate who is not with us this evening. And on the Republican side, we have Leslie Tarkington, Nisha Arora, David Alfano, Karen Fasuliotis, I practiced that, Lucius Jansen, and Harry Fisher. So welcome all, and thank you for being here. And now to the debate. And the first candidate to respond will be Leslie Moriarty from the Democratic Party. And so Jack posed the first question.
Thank you, Mrs. Maxwell. Mrs. Moriarty, if your party is the one that benefits from the chair's tie-breaking vote, what will you and your colleagues do to collaborate and take into account the expertise of the other party?
First, I want to thank the League for hosting the debate and for everybody attending. It's not always easy to get out in the evening, and we really appreciate your attention to this important election. I think the partisan divide that we've seen on this board in the past 4 years is not serving the town well. I think it's very important for us to collaborate and to try to reach consensus on issues rather than have so many votes and issues decided by tie-breaking votes. I have to tell you that at the committee level, we do see a little bit more consensus and working together than you can see when all 12 of us meet for the final votes every month. However, it's important to carry over that sense of collaboration and consensus that we have at the committee level. Now, I'm realistic to know that we're not going to reach agreement on every issue, that there are specific areas where we, I think, disagree fundamentally on the way the town should go forward. I think we've seen that mostly on capital, that I believe that our Republican colleagues currently on the board have not done sufficient planning for the capital needs of the town. There is a huge backlog of projects, and we need to move forward. And I'm hoping that we can build that consensus in the next BET.
All right, thank you. And the next, from the Republican side, will be
So thank you very much. I'm Leslie Tarkington, and I thank the League for the opportunity to meet and talk with the voters. So thank you very much. Ms. Moriarty has brought up some very good points, and you know, some of them I agree with. I think that the winning party not only has the tie-breaking vote, but also pretty much works to have the leadership in many of our committees. I do agree that a tremendous amount of work is being done at the committee level, and it tends to be collaborative because the work needs to get done. And there's a task at hand that we have. We have a fiduciary responsibility to all the voters, and I think each of us, no matter which party we are, take that very seriously. I think that there have been opportunities when this tie-breaking vote has been used more, and I think that despite that, we approved approximately $112 million in projects in this current budget year. That is a record, but while Ms. Moriarty talks about adding additional projects, we have to think about both executing the projects and executing them well, and working together to get all that work done, and working with our town employees. I just want to comment that at the moment, we currently have about $226 million of projects approved. We're now basically 4 months, or almost 4 months through the fiscal year. We find that the maximum amount of work gets done in the summer, especially with the schools, because you know, the kids are on vacation and there's availability. But the fact that we've got 369 projects yet to be completed means that, you know, I think we're, you know, working together on the committee level, but we have to be more realistic about what's being presented by the departments. And I'd just like to add that in addition, this year, the BET approved approximately, of that $112 million, approximately 75% of that amount was for our schools. So we take our schools and the buildings in which our children are housed for 5 days a week very seriously. And the Republican Party did prioritize in this year's budget such items as ADA and you know, clean air, et cetera. And we've also used other government funds to support that. Thank you.
Okay. On the Democratic side, anyone else want to add something to that question? Go ahead.
So I think it's a great question, and probably the best question to start this debate with. If our party is fortunate enough to win the majority and have the tie-breaking vote, the very first thing I would do in collaboration would reach out to our colleagues from the other side and implement the plan that the League of Women Voters, the capital plan that the League of Women Voters has so intelligently put together, which is to create a capital plan which has been sorely lacking in this community to address the billion-dollar-plus backlog of projects that are not being financed. The only way to deal with this is to put together a plan, as the League has wisely recommended, and to work together to evaluate projects, to debate the projects. That should be the heart and soul of the work that we do at the BET. Unfortunately, it is not taking place. The old capital improvement plan that existed back in the old era when there was collaboration between Democrats and Republicans no longer exists. There is no longer such a plan. We need to restore that plan. We need to reach out, work together. There's no such thing as a Democrat or Republican pothole or Democrat or Republican school. I would like to also correct one thing, because it is a debate, and it's not, you know, all lovey-dovey, and that is, yes, while there may be a appropriation that my colleague to the left just identified, I would call it a phantom appropriation. Why? 60 million of it is associated with the Central Middle School, where the funding is not anywhere near what the requirements are as submitted by the Board of Education and by the Building Committee. And so that 60 million is not really an appropriation because it's insufficient to meet what the the building committee and the Board of Education are asking for, and those votes get denied and denied and denied. Thank you.
Go ahead. Nisha?
Thank you. I just want to share a little bit my perspective. I'm Nisha Aurora. I'm completing my first term on the BET. And I'll say before I joined the BET, my perspective in thinking about finance or thinking about how our towns run, when I talked and I, talk to neighbors and I see some of my Democratic friends here, we all tended to agree that we all wanted the best services and we wanted them at the best cost. So really, when I joined the board, I thought this would be an easy role to take. We'll work across the aisle. We're kind of all going towards the same end goal. And what I really found is this really lack of wanting to compromise and work with each other. So the reason I think Republicans, and when we have the chairmanship and when we have determined, used our tie-breaking vote, it's because the inability of my colleagues on my right and your left to really compromise. And David mentioned the example of Central Middle. Central Middle's budget, $70 million, was a unanimous vote by this board, requested by the Board of Ed and agreed to unanimously by this board. The budget then went to $85 million. Our Democratic colleagues urged us to approve it. We said, hold on, we don't have any additional information. They asked no questions. They said, we are here to be a rubber stamp for the Board of Ed. The budget then went to 90, still no questions asked. The budget went to 100, no question asked. Now the budget's at $112 million. And we'll see this play out over the next few days. Are our colleagues willing to compromise, or is it 112 or the highway? And we'll see it play out. There's never a moment of compromise. If we did actually reach across the aisle, offer compromises, I think we would work so much better together. The reason Republicans have had to use the tie-breaking vote is simply because we always find this position that we are unable to find a middle ground. So it leaves us with our way or their way. And unfortunately, when you have the ability to make a decision, we're going to go our way. So I would encourage, I would love to work together, but I would encourage both sides to do their part.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to just say that for the benefit of the audience, I was a Republican for 30 years. And one of the reasons why I decided to run for this seat is because I was dismayed with the fact that there was a tie-breaking vote used by my colleagues 47 times. It's not consistent with the way this town's operated or where this BET has operated historically. And with all due respect to what was just said, it's difficult to compromise with individuals who put out numbers that are inaccurate, that anchor this town to completely unnecessarily wrong data. On the BOC, which I served for the last 2 years, I will say that we were able to unanimously pass a BOC budget guidelines, and that has not been done before. That came through hard work, through discussion, and through fact-based decision-making. It can be done. We are committed to doing it, but we need to make sure we use good data, provide the town with accurate information.
Anything else on that question? Are you ready to move to the next one? Okay, and I should just remind you that what your timers are going to be showing is the time you've spent speaking once you've finished with a question. So you'll be able to see shortly what your time expended was. So, Jack, next question, and Leslie, you're the first to respond.
Thank you. Mrs. Starkington, what financing strategies would you employ to fund and complete critical town infrastructure projects while mitigating their impact on the mill rate?
So the town has really two different budgets. One's an operating budget and one is a capital budget. So, I think you're asking a question about the capital budget. And we do our financing in those funds. Quite frankly, we have a plan where unlike the private sector, we actually have pretty sophisticated financial people, and we fund our projects based on cash flow. So the cash flow that we're spending in a particular year, and we balance that out. As an example, so one of the advantages of that program is we're always financing at the what's typically the lower end of the yield curve, and that gives us a much advantage lower rate in terms of financing. We obviously have formulas that we look in terms of our ratios, and really don't have an issue with that. As an example of longer-term financing, but done the town's way at the lower end of the mill rate, is our MISA financing for the Performing Arts Center and the instructional space. And that financing is actually done over 17 years. Our program basically starts out with a one-year ban, anticipation note, and that's rolled over another time, and then we issue 5-year bonds. So that's really an 8-year financing program with equal amortization in years 4 through 8. And the program has worked very well. So it's really minimizing the impact on the general fund. Where it does impact the general fund is what we decide to place in our capital tax levy. And generally, we've been increasing that about $3 million per year in anticipation of increasing debt. We're entering this period when we will have increased debt after a period when actually our debt has been low, and that will help to bridge us in this effort.
Okay, I wasn't sure of the format because we
Go back
answered
and forth,
questions
but
already, but
she'll be the
okay.
first one with the next
So
question.
the issue about the impact on the mill rate with our projects is a critical one for this town to understand. And, back in the days that Ms. Harkington's talking about, when our capital budgets were in the $40 million range, we can accommodate it easily without significant planning. But back in the fiscal 20, the 15-year capital budget for the town changed from $600 million over 15 years to $1.4 billion. And that change was driven by the completion of the school's master plan. They were identifying the schools that needed renovation, addressing both security, air quality, accessibility issues, as well as enrollment capacity issues and space needs that the schools had. Big nut to try to absorb with our traditional financing plan. But in that 4 years, since we've known that there is this large capital backlog developing and this large capital need that we have, there has been no change, no discussion amongst the 12 members of the BET on what our financial plan needs to be. Ms. Harkington talked about the capital tax levy, which is a key driver. That's the money we put away from property taxes to fund this larger capital program. It has not gone up $3 million a year in the past 4 years. It's gone up a measly $118,000 one year, $1 million the following year. It has not kept up with the plans that we need to do to fund that capital plan. It hasn't happened. So what does that mean? That means the other two factors come into play to be able to fund it. The first is just limit your capital, don't spend it, which is what we have seen in 4 years of budgets. In 4 years of budgets, the Democrats, unfortunately, have not been able to support the budget proposed and voted on by the Republicans. 4 years of 7-6 budgets, and the primary reason is this lack of planning for capital and not addressing the needs that have been identified. The third aspect clearly has to do with this funding plan. Ms. Harkington talked about 17 years for MISA. That's not because we're bonding things for 17 years. It means that it took 9 years to complete the project. We're doing 5-year bonding for that project. We just spent it over a long period of time. And as she did say correctly, we only bond for the cash needs we have. So going forward, it is imperative that this board look at the capital plan, look at the way we fund it, and plan appropriately to match these future needs. We've entered a period of high construction inflation now, so all those estimates that are sitting in that capital plan, it now is at $900 million, down from 1.4, but those numbers are stale. Interest rates are higher, so we have to account for more interest expense and service. And I know I'm getting into the weeds, I'm sorry, but this board needs to plan for those cash outlays in order for us to maintain what we need for our town and to keep our community attractive for young families. Young families look at our schools and say, I'm moving to Darien. They take care of their school buildings. Greenwich, what's Greenwich doing? They're arguing over, making a building accessible so a child can get upstairs when they have a broken leg. So I get very passionate about this topic. To me, this is the most critical issue facing the town, and we need to do it properly.
Anyone on the Republican side to comment? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi, good evening. I'm Lucia Jansen. I am a 18-year veteran of the RTM. I am currently the Budget Overview Committee Chair. I have been for the last 8 years, and I have seen a lot over the years. And since the Facilities Management Plan was referenced by the previous speaker, it is really vital to highlight that funding was the least of the issues. When that report was released in 2018, when you look at what were the Board of Ed members, what were the school administration members, what were the finance members, who was the director of facilities, all of the people have changed. It is a people issue to implement this billion-dollar plan, and this has been a problem. The second issue is process and technology. Due to many, many issues that have occurred over the years with Julian Curtis Roof, the North Miamis implementation of a pipe over a drywall, many, many issues. We have had to deal with producing an audit of the Board of Ed. That audit resulted in showing that there is a process issue and technology issue. There was an update just recently, September 2023, a month ago, asking what has been implemented of this Bloom-Shapiro audit from 2018, and very little has done to address the process and technology issues. The chief operating officer admitted that the data is in such disarray that they could not implement the asset management software that was recommended. There is no project management software. We are dealing with $1 billion of projects without the 21st century modern tools that have been around since the 1980s. I bring to the BET 15 years in the high technology sector. These implementations have been done years ago. So there is a people problem, a process problem, and then finally is the funding. And what I have seen over the 30-plus years that I've lived here, that residents continue to come to Greenwich because of our excellent quality services and also the low taxes today and the promise of low taxes tomorrow. There are a lot of choices for people in Westchester and other towns in Connecticut, and this is an important point to keep affordability for the residents that choose Greenwich. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Elliot.
Unmute yourself, as they say.
I'm Elliot Alcheck, and I'm not a politician. I really am not interested in politics. I am a finance guy, though, and I have undergraduate and graduate degrees in finance. I was a credit analyst for 4 years at J.P. Morgan Chase, and I spent 15 years running municipal bonds and infrastructure finance at Goldman Sachs. I have over a 40-year career in finance. Now, just a moment ago, our colleague said, and I quote, "We have a pretty sophisticated financial people." Like, I'm not interested in pretty sophisticated. I'm interested in excellence. I'm interested in getting it right. And I'm just going to leave you with a few facts, and you tell me, you make the decision, okay? 2 years ago to the day, 10/18/21, we could have issued 5-year debt at 0.74%. 0.74%, okay? Today, I ran these numbers as of today, incidentally. Now we're at 364. The difference in interest alone is $7.6 million. I'm paying for that. You're all paying for that. You haven't paid it yet. You haven't seen it in your mill rate increase. That's just waste, right? That's just waste. Now, that is in addition to the additional cost that we're going to pay because construction inflation in the last 4 years alone has been 50%. That number, I'm not pulling that out of the air. I'm taking that from what construction companies, including our architect Slam, has told me directly, okay? So delaying and denying has cost all of us money, and we are paying for that waste.
Yes, whichever one of you wish.
Okay. You know, the main issue here is that the underlying basis of our debt policy is we borrow money when we need it. And borrowing is done to meet the cash flow needs of a project. So instead of borrowing the full amount of a project at the initiation of a project that I think our opponents want to do, the borrowing occurs in phases called tranches to meet cash flow needs of the project. Now, the BET and the RTM agreed that we would finance capital projects in 3 phases: the feasibility phase, the architectural phase, and the construction phase. So each phase is then funded with a bond anticipation note rolled for a second year and then amortized through a 5-year term financing. Okay? Fancy way of saying we borrow over 5 years. Now, I'd like to give you some ideas of how Democrats seem to run our country and our state. As an individual, your share of the federal government's debt is now at $100,207. Your share of Connecticut's debt is $15,018, the second highest in the nation. All of this spells taxation for you in the future. In contrast, the town's debt after borrowing this last January was $151,877,000, or only $2,433.93 per capita. So the Democrat-led country and state are costing you $115,000, and our Republican-led town is costing you $2,434. Which would you want in charge of your town's finances? We don't want to bring these failed policies to our town. So in contrast to your federal and state massive debts, Republican leadership has successfully kept Greenwich debt manageable with the modified pay-as-you-go. It's one of the biggest successes for our town under Republican management.
Anyone on the
Yeah.
Let's see, we haven't heard from, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, if we could please, don't want to waste time with applause and things. We want to hear from people,
So let's go back to the question. The question was, what's the financing strategy and so forth? And I think it's, let's face it, the role of the BET is to finance the needs of the community. It's not we're not here to have an arcane debate about models and so forth. We do that. That's what we live for. We're financial nerds. But I think the audience and the public is really asking, what is your strategy to finance the needs of our community? And I'm just hearing that an indictment against the Board of Education, which is frankly also an elected body, that the fault of all this is due to audit issues at the Board of Ed and technology issues and process issues and all the rest. Listen, there's raw, you know this, there's raw sewage coming out when the floods occur in our school today. Now, I would ask anyone here whether that is something that we want to tolerate.
Excuse me, please, can we keep it quiet in the audience so that we can all hear? Thank you.
As citizens of this town. Yes, people come here because of the low taxes. Yes, they come here for the excellent schools, but they aren't coming here when our schools start to crumble and deteriorate. So I think that we have to, and you know, look, today's Greenwich Time headlines it well. BET stalls funding for the school projects. And that says it all. I mean, there is a responsibility. If every single Board of Ed member votes to fund the Old Greenwich project, Democrats and Republicans, if the building committee, bipartisan, votes unanimously to fund the project, if every one of our select people, Democrat and Republican, supports the project, if our Planning and Zoning Commission votes unanimously to support the project, I think that is the voice of the community saying, let's do the project. Instead, there is delay. It is just not right.
Anyone on the other who has not spoken yet? Go ahead, yes.
I'm Harry Fisher, and I've got a long history with this board, although it goes over a couple of decades. I was on this in the 90s when the original modified pay-as-you-go was put into effect, and we follow it pretty much today, and it's worked for decades very, very well. My future colleague referred to being able to borrow 2 years ago at 0.75%. Well, if we'd done that before we needed the cash, we would have banked the cash in Treasury bills, earning a higher rate of interest, and would have violated the IRS rules and had to pay penalties. You can't borrow before the funds are needed. And as for the sewage leakage at Old Greenwich, the Republicans had the initiative to put money in the budget, in the current year budget, to fix that, and the Board of Ed has not fixed it. It's external to the school. It could easily be fixed before the renovation happens. And finally, it's just disingenuous to say that anybody on the current BET doesn't support these projects. We have all expressed that we do support the school projects. We'll continue to support the school projects, but we'll fund them when we have hard numbers. We've got numbers that have grown old. They are prior to the design development process on both schools, and we want to get harder numbers, and none of our actions or inactions are going to delay the projects. That's just a fallacy. Thank you.
Anything else on this side? Are you ready for the next question? Oh, go ahead, ma'am.
I just simply want to add, for the benefit of those who may not be aware, that any long-term funding would require approval from everyone you see at this table tonight. It requires 7 votes. It is not the goal of the Democratic Party to engage in long-term financing. That is not our objective. We're aware of the benefits that long-term financing can provide in certain circumstances, and you know who else is? The Republicans, because they have a debt policy that so states. It's something that towns should look at certain instances, as they agreed, when you have large capital projects, $50, $100 million, significant capital projects. This town has many. The League of Women Voters has identified those, $1.6 billion worth of capital projects. And we need to work together to figure out, A, how to prioritize them, and B, how to fund them in fairness to our community. Many of these capital projects have useful lives of 30 to 50 years. Residents who move into Greenwich should not benefit or free ride from those projects because you were all paying for it. There are times and instances where it does make sense to consider these fundings, but it is not the objective to just go out and get long-term funding for the sake of doing so. Thank you.
Ready for the next question? No, go ahead.
I want to just, I think what differs from the Republicans and our Democratic opponents is that the BET Democrats believe that our only job is to finance a project and not to ask questions. We differ from them in that, and we believe it's our fiduciary duty to do our due diligence and ask questions. There are so many examples of projects exploding in cost because they were either rushed or the nice-to-haves were added. And the argument that we build for the next 100 years is simply not true. Central is one of those examples. It was built in the 50s, and it's not a 100-year building. And actually, the 100-year buildings that we have were better made than the ones that were made in the 50s and 60s.
Are you ready to move on to the next question, or do you have something else to say? Yes, go ahead,
I'm
Leslie.
sorry, I really want to move on to the next question, but I can't let that go unchallenged. We are equally as concerned that the dollars that we approve will be used for the benefit of all the residents. to say that we are indiscriminate in improving anything that comes in front of us is just wrong information. Clearly, it's taking an extreme position that I think is not based at all in fact, and trying to tilt it to your particular objective tonight. I think you will find that the 6 BET Democrat candidates here, we're fiscally conservative. We understand the details. We've done building projects ourselves. I've sat on 2 building committees. I understand what goes on, and you know the details of these projects. The fact that there have been overruns on projects the past few years is construction inflation. I want to say that my Republican colleagues, took the Hamel Rink project that was in the budget for $21 million, and it magically went down to $11 million this year in the budget. That was what's stated in the future year. This morning at the Rink Committee meeting, the stated cost of that project is $22 million. So who is using good information and trying to plan appropriately? I'm not sure I can say that are my colleagues.
I think we've heard from both sides, so if you're ready to move on, please. Yes, you may.
I just want to point out one thing. I have financed hundreds of billions of dollars in municipal debt. Virtually every school district, every municipality in the United States uses long-term financing. In fact, they issue 30-year debt. 20 years is considered shorter-term debt. Okay, I want to leave you with that. Secondly, look, one thing that everyone should know is we on the Democratic side are committed to maintaining our AAA rating. So if anything we do, any debt that gets issued, whether it's 5 years or 20 years, has to be supported by a AAA rating. And I'm personally committed to that, and I know my colleagues are as well. When the Republicans say they want to issue debt for 5 years, that is just code for we don't want to spend the money in the first place. And this idea of doing 1 + 1 + 5, when you issue 1-year debt, I mean, think about it on your own home. If you issue 1-year debt, you're taking massive interest rate risk for that period. If interest rates go up a year from now, then we're borrowing at a much higher rate. So this is all, nobody's fooled by this. You all know that this is delay, 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 and no one's fooled by it.
Okay, one more comment on that, and
I just wanted to add to Ms. Moriarty's comment a correction, because I think the number that we've put into the equivalent of capital tax levy is something like $3.2 million for the last period that she was talking about, 4 years. In addition to putting cash into into that capital fund, we're also making some modifications due to accounting changes, and those accounting changes, once you start them, occur year after year after year. So it's basically, we're at the point of having moved back into operating $6.4 million of projects that were equivalent in our capital fund. So you can begin to multiply that by your 15 years or whatever. We're basically improving the quality of our accounting.
I'm good. Okay.
This will be brief. But
yes.
So two things really quick. I'm indifferent whether we do long-term or not. I mean, I would ask anybody, when you buy a house, do you pay for it in 5 years? Or do you pay for it in 20 years? But everybody can figure that out themselves. I would also say that we are the only AAA community in the state that does this modified pay-as-you-go. I don't see Wilton, Darien, and Westport having any financial troubles, and they are all AAA and managed very well. I would then also say, if you want to stay with the modified pay-as-you-go, God bless, we can do that, but you got to pay. There's a key word there, pay. And so I can point to 3 years, from fiscal 20 to 21, the amount we put into it declined, it went up by 3, it declined by $2 million. In fiscal year 22, it didn't go up at all. In fiscal year 23, it went up $1 million. So you have a herky-jerky thing. You change the contribution when you want to keep the mill rate low, and you increase it in other years. That's not pay under a modified pay-as-you-go. You got to do it every year consistently, like clockwork. Otherwise, you're fooling everybody.
Are we ready? All right. Next question, and actually I think I'm going to find it follows along, and it's will be Steve Herbst, who will be the first to respond to the question. Go ahead, Jack.
Mr. Selpt, what do you think is the biggest policy difference between you and your opponents?
Well, actually, I think we've heard a pretty good discussion of that for the last couple of minutes, but I'm going to try to respond anyhow. I think there is a fundamental difference, and I think that actually we heard it. My role, and for those of you who are not familiar with me, I'm completing my first term on the BET. I also sit on the Old Greenwich School Building Committee. I conceive my role on the BET as finding a way to finance the needs of the community in a way that is fiscally proper. And it goes to what David Weisbrot just said, which is find a way to finance what the community sees as fiscally proper. Now, I think we've had a pretty robust narration or debate about the schools, for example. And I want to use Central Middle School as an example. Ms. Aurora said, well, we're the only ones who are asking the questions, and it's not true. The 67.5 that was in the budget was on one of those 7-6 votes, but in fact, the budget that's 110, that is the proposed budget for Central Middle School, has been the subject of extensive community debate. You've got a bipartisan school committee, a building committee that approved it, and you had strong support with it from the Board of Education. What you've really got is a handful of people who are substituting their judgment for the will of the community. That's not my view. My view is I will listen to the constituents. I will let the community guide what our decisions will be, and then we'll find a prudent way to finance that. Everything my colleagues have said about AAA rating, yeah, I'm with that. I'm not as much of a technician as Elliot, thank God. So I'm not going to express the same views about about whether it should be 5 or 10. But what I would say about long-term financing is it's an alternative. It's a tool that's in the toolbox. But I think the difference, and I want to emphasize this point, is we believe that we should find a way to find the funding for the needs of the community. And I want to make one more point. We've talked an awful lot this cycle about the schools, and that's entirely appropriate. The schools are an urgent need. The old Greenwich renovation, as I said, I sit on the building committee, is an urgent need. Central Middle School is an urgent need. But we have other needs in this community that are not being met. And one of the consequences of the modified 5-year pay-as-you-go plan is that other capital projects are being delayed and deferred. In technical terms, they're being crowded out. We have unmet ADA needs in this community. The schools are currently looking at and assessing the ADA needs of the community, but I'm going to just give you the warning. It's going to be a real number. We have ADA compliance issues at our parks. You know, the ADA has been in existence since 1990, and it's more than shameful that a community this wealthy has not brought itself fully into compliance with ADA. There are other issues. Someone mentioned a few moments ago, we're not buying enough fire trucks. Our average age of our fire trucks is beyond their estimated useful life. And yet we've seen Republicans turn down funding for the fire trucks for the last 4 years in a row. That's a public safety issue. To me, that's an obvious need of the community. Finally, we face climate change. We face climate change and we're not adequately prepared for it. Greenwich has 30 miles of shoreline. Hundreds of resident homes are in the floodplain. More importantly than that, town assets are in the floodplain. We don't have a comprehensive climate change plan. 4 years ago, there was $1.5 million in the budget to even study it. That got taken out of the budget and it's never been restored. The Finance Board has a job, and the job is to consider not just this year's budget, but the long-term issues that are facing the town. And if you don't think climate change is facing this town, you are respectfully mistaken. So that's how I view my responsibility, and I think it is a significant and profound policy difference. Thank you.
Nisha, the same question?
Yeah, do you mind repeating the question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Not at all. What would you say is the biggest policy difference between you and your opponents?
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to introduce myself briefly. My name's Nisha Aurora. As I mentioned, this is I'm finishing my first term on the BET. Professionally, I spent 20 years in investment management and finance before joining. I'm a mom of 3 teenagers. I am using my microphone.
Maybe a little closer.
I'm a mom of 3 teenagers. I grew up in a small, modest neighborhood in Delaware, and I feel so blessed to be able to call Greenwich my home. And I'm honored to be here with my distinguished guests. I will start by saying, in terms of, just want to address a little bit of our differences. I'm not quite sure what the Democratic platform is on spending. I just heard Mr. Deschamps say we're not taking on long-term debt, and then I heard Mr. Alchek arguing very actively that we will be taking on long-term debt. I'm not clear where we are, but I will say on debt financing, we are really fortunate that our town has such a healthy grand list. We have a $36 billion grand list. We can fund the best town services without taking on debt. If we don't have to take on debt, why should we do it? Debt is an obligation that we pass on to our future generation. We also believe public debt is a very slippery slope. It's addictive. You start with a little bit, then a little bit more, and then before you know it, you have too much of it. Our federal debt exemplifies this unfortunate trajectory. Greenwich has been debt-free for over a century, and we want to keep it that way. It does not prevent us from providing the best schools, the best infrastructure and services, because we do have a large and growing grand list. Now, in terms of the differences in terms of our platform, let me just contrast between our Republican platform and our Democrat platform. We believe that the role of the BET is to diligently evaluate the budget and make sure there is no wastage. Our platform is to fund the best schools and the town services while keeping taxes affordable. Conversely, the Democratic platform here is to provide unconstrained budgets and find ways to raise money. That is the difference. Our team has asked tough questions, sometimes inconvenient. My Democrat colleagues go with the flow like populists do. That is the difference. Our focus is to find solutions, find the right balance. My Democrat colleagues do not like compromising or finding middle ground. That is the difference. We have a plan for modernizing our infrastructure. We have a plan for meeting our affordable housing goals and putting an end to state control over zoning. And we have a plan to address flooding. Respectfully, my Democrat colleagues have no plan at all. All I hear is political maneuvers. That is the difference. And I'm going to end with a little bit about climate change because my colleague, Mr. Selps, brought this up. I just want to step back and talk about climate mitigation overall. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We owe it to our community, our children. We should find ways to reduce the maximum amount of emissions for each dollar of our investment. In the US, we release 6 billion tons of carbon emissions, and Greenwich is about 1 million. Our objective is to cut into that number. We have several ways to reduce emissions. We can replace all regular bulbs with LEDs. We can install solar. We can build better buildings with better insulation. We can drive EVs. We can install geothermal HVACs. Each of those requires an investment and reduces emissions by a certain quantity of tons for that investment. Here's why geothermal is the most expensive and somewhat unreliable way to reduce emissions. $1 million investment in solar, for example, would reduce 5 to 10 times as much tonnage of carbon as would $1 million investment in geothermal. $1 million investment in LEDs would go still further. Let's stop with the virtue signaling. Let's make decisions which can materially change the equation. I'm going to leave it at that, but I have a lot more I can add to, but, I'll wait.
Further comment? Yes. Whichever one of you.
I have to say, this is the first time I've been called a populist. I kind of like the idea because it's really, I got to say, so I spent 38 years at J.P. Morgan, that highly populist place. I was vice chairman of J.P. Morgan and responsible for risk management at J.P. A really populist role, if there ever was one. My colleagues, I should say, my colleague to the right was running the municipal bond desk at Goldman Sachs. His colleague to the right was at Citigroup and started 2 asset management, highly successful asset management firms. His colleague to the right is an esteemed lawyer, very well regarded in the field, and his colleague to the right is our leader, Leslie Moriarty, who has phenomenal experience in strategic planning in exemplary organizations, went to Harvard Business School, and has been a pillar of this community, both on the Board of Education as the chair and then serving on this committee as well. So that, and then the notion that we don't ask questions. I mean, really, you don't think we've done budgets among ourselves? That this is the first time we've seen a budget? I mean, really, give us a break. This is ridiculous. And the other thing I'd say, there was a time, not under this administration, but the previous administration, where a plan was being envisioned to relinquish our air rights at Greenwich Plaza. Very, very, very valuable air rights that are worth probably enough to fund the entire Old Greenwich School renovation. So we're the ones who asked the hard questions to stop that transaction, which probably in itself will fund the cost of Old Greenwich School. So please, thanks.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, that was a good reconstituted history, because I think there were Republicans that also asked the hard questions on the air rights. So thank you, Mr. Weisbrod, for giving us kudos as well. You know, there was a lot to unpack with what Steve said. With respect to ADA, the Board of Education has control of the buildings, and for years, the Board of Education has done nothing to address the ADA, and that's since 1990 when ADA, and we have a person on this board that was chair of the BOE and who could have addressed ADA but did not. So it was Republicans that gave the money to start the process. With respect to projects, we always have asked for transparency, but you know, I think a lot of attention has been given to the capital projects for the BOE. And look, I've been sitting on the BET, and I'm willing to approve capital projects that make sense. I've been doing it for years. But there is a reality of what the BOE needs to address, and we need a plan from the BOE to right-size its facilities. Why is it that Greenwich Academy, for example, can build a state-of-the-art facility for $600 to $700 a square foot, but the BOE is asking for over $1,000 per square foot for Central Middle School? What is the BOE doing? What is the Central Middle School Building Committee doing? The reality is that our town needs to build the right-sized school facilities, and they should take a deep dive and revise their buildings accordingly. I'd also like to address the $1 billion number that's been thrown out by our opponents. And by the way, the Democrats, as we have seen in their mailers, and the League of Women Voters is in lockstep with that narrative, is that the Republicans have deferred $1 billion in investment in our schools. It's clear that none of these folks have read the report that they take this number from. It's clear, or still, that folks on the BOE need to read the report as well. This is what the BOE's own published master plan says. If you look at the BOE strategic plan, it's a 15-year plan. And a former BOE chair said it's probably more like a 25-year plan. People have been trying to pack in everything into 5 years. That's just not the reality. Their capital plan is divided into infrastructure and model program expenditures. In the BOE's master plan, 59% of the estimated cost is for infrastructure. Using the League of Women Voters $1 billion, the cost for infrastructure is actually $590 million. It's right there in this document. Look it up. I can give you the page numbers if you'd like. The rest of the money is to include upgrades for a model program portion, which accounts for 41% of the expenditures, which amounts to $410 million. Again, it says so in this document. Here's the interesting part that I don't think people realize. The model program in this document was to change all the instructional spaces to support the BOE's personalized learning strategy. But this learning strategy was abandoned by Superintendent Jones in 2018. So 41% of the expenditures are not relevant today. So if you take the $1 billion that the League of Women Voters and Democrats are throwing around, 41% or $410 million is for an obsolete model program, money that shouldn't be spent today. And again, if you don't believe me, look it up. It's right here in this document. It's also important to point out that the 15-year BOE master plan is based on 9,400 students. The current enrollment is 8,500 and is continuing to shrink. They're not my numbers, they're the Board of Ed numbers. So the buildings they are talking about in the master plan are based on costs that include programmings in our school system we don't have today. It's also sizing the buildings for students that we simply don't have. We need a plan from the Board of Ed to right-size its facilities. The Board of Ed today needs to have a conversation about how they will right-size these buildings. And I'm sorry, the answer from the Board of Ed person, who I believe wants to become the next chairman's response to building CMS for 270 more kids than they currently have of if you build them, they will come, is totally irresponsible. Where are these kids coming from? And more importantly, is that really any way to plan and build our schools? We need to have an intelligent conversation about our school buildings. Democrats and their proxies have got to stop spreading the false information they are spreading. It's simply not helping our kids or our community. Finally, if any Democratic opponents on the BET and BOE have their way, they will be spending your tax dollars that will drive our elderly who are on fixed incomes and our moderately income families out of Greenwich. The people who are barking the loudest on funding are those that don't seem to care about those folks. And I know I and my Republican colleagues on this dais will continue to represent everyone in Greenwich, not just the 30% with kids in our schools.
Democratic side, excuse me, please. Let's move on. Who was, Matt, were you the one? Oh, Leslie, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. I'm going to go back to Ms. Aurora's initial response because clearly the Democrats don't have a platform, she says, but yet she very eloquently put words in our mouth to identify what that might be. She also talked about how their platform, and they know exactly where they want to go, which we've seen no evidence of in the past 2 years from those incumbents who are running again, because we haven't seen any projects in the budget that specifically match the programs that she's talking about. I also want to point out, when we talk about how do we get our data, how do we vet projects, you know, the people on this dais don't have all the answers. And if we believe we do, then we are not serving you properly. We have department heads who have years of experience. We have other experts within town that are called upon to vet the projects, explain them to us, get into a discussion. And I can't recall the last time those departments came before the Budget Committee, of which Ms. Aurora serves on, as do I, and we got into a conversation. Instead, I hear our members dictating to that department head, this is the information that I have. You should be able to build it for this. We know the conditions of your particular property. Here's the answer that you should have. And there is no conversation. The meeting we had at the end of June about Old Greenwich was just appalling to me. We had people in the room who are willing to talk about the projects, the cost of rebuilding versus build new. There was not a conversation. It was shut down after 5 minutes saying, we know better. So what you will get with a Democratic-led BET is a consensus building, not just among Republicans, and we would like to try to do that if possible, but with the rest of the community members, but also involve our staff who know our issues and problems better. They can't set the priorities, but they can help us form them. They can help us identify what pitfalls we're going to have when we try to move forward. And that's the kind of government we want that serves you well. Knowing that there is a cost to things, there is not a blank check. Nobody on this dais believes there is a blank check. But we need to use good information, and we need to probe for that information and not just assume we know the right answer.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, at the end, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I want to go back to the comment about the fire truck and public safety. And I'll start by saying, there they go again, trying to scare the public that Republicans don't support public safety, and especially the fire trucks. Back in the pre-COVID era, there was a fire truck that was deferred when the Democrats were in control of the Board of Estimate. We are committed to buying 2 trucks a year, and we will do so as long as there's a need. Saying that the trucks are beyond their life is not true, because the primary trucks are within the specs. And, you know, if you have a car and it breaks down, you fix it. Well, we did have a truck. One of the ladder trucks broke down, and it got fixed very quickly. And we were never at risk because we have sharing arrangements with neighboring towns. So please don't be scared off. I also want to point out that a number of years ago, the Office of the Fire Marshal, a Democrat member of the Budget Committee at the time, made a motion to reduce the regular salaries by $103,000 for one deputy fire marshal. And the motion was seconded by Ms. Moriarty. Mr. Raymer made the motion. And that motion thankfully did not pass, but it's the Democrats that have been trying to undermine the Republican efforts to support public safety, and I just don't think we should stand for that. Thank you.
Matt?
I'm a former volunteer fireman. I met with Chief McHugh. He has many needs that this town has not met. It is not scaring the public to inform them that a ladder truck was not available to Greenwich last month. It should be of great concern. And it was something that this BET rejected repeatedly and was quoted by Ms. Tarkington saying, we will have one apparatus at a time. That's fine if Greenwich needs one apparatus at a time. It's not fine when we need two or more apparatuses at a time. Don't take my word for it. Speak to the fire department. Talk to the chief. Talk to the other assistant chiefs in town. We can do far better when it comes to providing safety for our residents. If you need a fire truck, you want it to be available to you and your family at a time of need. It's very important also that we support our volunteer firemen and women and our career officers as well. I have never met a volunteer fireman that doesn't respect the career fireman. I have never met a career fireman that doesn't respect the volunteer firemen. And unfortunately, that group is being pitted against each other at times unnecessarily. They work together well. The SOP, standard operating procedures, are the germane of the fire department, not the BET, the BOC, or the RTM. They're the most qualified to make these decisions. I'd like to quickly go back to the question that was originally asked by Mr. Howes, and that was the differences between our two parties. One of the things I think that this party is going to stand for is making sure that we find revenue and cost-cutting initiatives for the town. I'll mention a few. Federal and state grant money that's made available to us that is repeatedly rejected. Economic and community development programs that we can take advantage of. Waste management reduction. Energy cost savings plan. Our budget is going up 54% this year on energy costs. We don't have effective means to control it. One of the things I'm going to do as a trained CPA is make sure I look very carefully at the operating budget to find ways we can reduce it. It's the major source of expenditures in this town. And the costs associated with energy consumption is significant. So that's something we can look at and something we can easily remedy, in my judgment, whether that's low-hanging fruit like LED lighting, whether that's solar arrays, as was previously mentioned by Ms. Aurora, which I greatly appreciate her support of, apparently, and also geothermal. She is mistaken in this regard. You need to read the science on these things. Geothermal is a proven energy-saving mechanism. It is cost-efficient, and it saves on carbon emissions. Many communities in the United States and globally use geothermal systems to great effect, and it's something that I know would benefit our town greatly. Thank you.
Yes, Nisha, sorry.
Yeah, no, I want to just, my name has been raised a few times, so just want to point out, since my time on this board, I think what has really irritated my colleagues is me going out and doing independent research to establish if a budget or what number makes sense. And I know it's been irritating for them. When I first joined this BET and we were asked to approve, I think, Eastern Greenwich Civic Center at 20-some million, I looked at my colleagues and I said, well, what are we basing it on? Like, what kind of information do we have? Maybe we should go out and try and get some independent estimates, or are we just going to take the number the department provides us? Fast forward, and I'm going to use Old Greenwich as an example because Mr. Weisbrot has brought that up. So Old Greenwich came to us just about back in the spring for a $40 million renovation. I live near Greenwich Academy, and I saw Greenwich Academy go up, put up a brand new lower school for around $24 million. So I brought that up with my board, and I said, hey, $40 million for a partial renovation looks kind of high. Greenwich Academy did a lower school for $24 million. One member of the Democrat BET jumped up and down, that's a private school. You're comparing apples to oranges. I said, okay, I mean, seems pretty reasonable to me. Schools are schools, but private schools, tend to do a great job. But okay, if you don't like that. So I went up and looked up every single public school that was built in Connecticut for the last decade. I looked at elementary schools, I looked at middle schools. I studied elementary schools, and I looked at the average cost of an elementary school about the size that we would need to build Old Greenwich, and it was about $45 million. And I said, well, in today's dollars, not in 2017, $18, in today's dollars. And we can argue, well, Mrs. Aurora makes up numbers and her facts aren't correct, but the data is the data. That's the number. So I looked at the renovation and said, well, the renovation at $42 million seems to be a partial renovation, and it's a 121-year-old building, and it's going to have some challenges, right? It's a building. We're not fixing the roof. We're not doing the windows. We're trying to fix ADA. Some of the ADA, we can't completely fix the ADA on a 121-year-old building, but, $40 million, and that was the number. And I said to my colleagues, do you think this number makes sense? And they're like, it makes sense. You must approve now. If you don't approve now, you're delaying. You're not approving. And we didn't approve it. And we said, listen, we did approve it, but we said we're going to put some contingencies on it. We're going to put 2 contingencies, specifically go back to the community and make sure the community understands that when you renovate a 121-year-old building and put $40 or $50 million into it, you're not getting another look at this 20 years down the line, said we woulda, coulda, shoulda. Are we sure this building is going to last 200 years? We said, well, by the way, if you're going to put 40 or 50 million into this building and you look at 121 years old, it's going to have some asbestos, it's going to have some hazardous materials. And I pointed this out in the spring. My colleagues will say she's fear-mongering. She just brought it up again. I brought this up in the spring. My colleagues said, nope, this is what we want to do. We got a plan. Fast forward to a week ago, this came back to the board. Neither had they gone out and gotten an independent estimate. Neither had they done the analysis of looking at a new school versus a renovation. They said, please waive those contingencies. We have a deadline of the end of October, which seemed artificial, but we need to know right now, right before the election, if you are going to approve the school or not. Was it politicized? Of course it was. And we said, you know what, we're going to waive these conditions, but we're not going to release the full construction funding until you go back to the community and make sure they understand what this renovation is going to look like. This 121-year-old renovation is not going to be what my colleagues say it is going to be. It is going to be a tough one. There is remediation. And I asked my Old Greenwich Building Committee chair at that time, what is that remediation? What does that mean for the parents? And I'll tell you, he said, well, you know what? I don't really know what it's going to look like. And since that meeting, I have had many, many Old Greenwich parents call me and say, what is going on? And I said, well, you know what? You were supposed to know. And this is really going back to my Democratic colleagues who keep saying, well, we do the due diligence. We ask the tough questions. Well, where were your tough questions? When did you ask those questions? Are you aware right now that the entire Old Greenwich community is not completely behind this renovation? Are you aware of that? Right? And the reason you probably are not is because you're not asking the right questions. I ask you, please ask the right questions. Make sure we get to the right place. We are all 100% behind getting Old Greenwich up to where it needs to be. But we need to figure out the right way. We need to do it responsibly. We need to make sure we ask the tough questions and we ask the right questions, and we're not just pandering.
All right. I want to point out, we obviously can have more discussion on this. We're almost getting to the time when it's time for closing statements. So we can either do one other question with one from each of you or continue on this. Your choice. You want to continue.
I need to respond. As I said before, I am a member of the Old Greenwich School Building Committee. I want to say a couple things. This community, I've lived in Old Greenwich for 30 years. I moved here in part, like so many others, because of the excellence of the schools. My 3 children all went through Old Greenwich School. That school, for those of you who know it, is the heart of that community. The school board, when it did the ed specs for Old Greenwich, asked the question of the community, among others, do you want to renovate the school or do you want a new school? And they were told, really with one voice, we want to renovate the school. We've also heard that from the community because the building committee in which I sit has had numerous meetings with the community, with the parents. That's the truth. Now, about the dangers of remediation. There is asbestos in Old Greenwich School. That's a fact. There's asbestos in every building of that age. But guess what? There are proven techniques for remediating schools with asbestos and keeping the kids safe. The Old Greenwich School Building Committee has a team of top-notch professionals. And one of the reasons we selected Downs Construction as the construction manager was in significant measure because Downs' specialty is renovation of schools in the state of Connecticut. James Waters did not know what the exact plan was going to be in terms of the remediation. We're not there yet, but I guarantee you we will make everybody aware of it. And what I believe is, and I know this is the case, it will be done safely and that we will not ever put children in this community at risk.
But ask the questions before you fund.
Excuse me. We have time for one more response from the Republican group.
I appreciate, Steve, your vehemence and your belief that you would not put children in risk. I think of everybody on this board. I have a PhD in toxicology. My senior thesis in college was on asbestosis and mesothelioma. And my father last year died of mesothelioma. So I know more about asbestos than I care to know about. And the truth of the matter is that even if you think people are safe, and by the way, I was down on September 11th and I was exposed to the asbestos in the air when the towers fell. So anybody who has any idea about asbestos, it's me. And if you think that you can control asbestos and keep kids safe in an environment, I would think about it and really plan for this on the committee because it's an insidious mineral and the effects won't be seen for another 30 or 40 years.
All right, I'm sure there are many other subjects we could go on for a long time, but the time has come for closing statements. So I'll let the timers clear their stopwatches. There are going to be 3 candidates from each party who will each give a 2-minute closing. Are you ready, timers? And I say they'll be showing when you've got 30 seconds left, that sort of thing. Are you set? Okay. First is Leslie Moriarty.
All right, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this debate and to thank Kay and Jack for your participation. There's a lot of misinformation being spread about what the Democratic leadership of the BET will do. So let me share our priorities. I'm going to use the format of David Letterman's Top 10, and I'll give you our top 5 list. Number 5, the BET is not directly involved, but we support local control for housing development. I'll repeat, we support local control for housing development. Number 4, we'll fund capital projects to save money. Delays are costing us, the taxpayers, more. Emergency repairs cost more than timely maintenance. And Republicans have ignored years of very low interest rates, which, along with construction inflation has added tens of millions of dollars to the town costs. Number 3, we will start funding the backlog of projects created by the Republicans. No school project in the 4-year-old master plan has a shovel in the ground. Requests for fire trucks have been rejected every year for 4 years. We will replace the BET Republicans' hollow words of support with actual funding. We will work with the community to develop priorities and will be disciplined in supporting the underlying financial plan. Number 2, we will keep taxes low. This can be done and still move forward with the capital investments that have been repeatedly delayed. Capital investment does not have a one-to-one impact on your annual taxes. Payments are spread over multiple years so we can fund multiple projects. It's not magic, it's prudent and professional management. Remember, we're taxpayers too. And number 1, we will listen because we are neighbors and we care about the same things as you, providing for our children, our older citizens, having our voices heard when decisions are being made, and keeping costs and taxes low and property values high. Please vote for the 6 Democrats and let us lead so we can get things done.
Thank you very much. Now, on the Republican side, Leslie Tarkington, your 2-minute close.
Yes, thank you very much, League of Women Voters. The 6 BET Republicans represent the strong fiscal leadership that Republicans have delivered for decades. Our Republican BET has a verifiable record of fiscal responsibility, spending, and debt policy. All have previously served as elected BET and/or RTM members, volunteering for a total of 50 years. We are reflective of town-changing demographics, diverse in age, ethnicity, and gender. Families choose Greenwich for safe neighborhoods and schools that BET Republicans have supported. BET Republicans have delivered the safety through police, including increased presence in schools, fire, and GEMS. Republicans support a vibrant business community in distinct villages and central Greenwich, residential green spaces, and tree-lined roads that provide the state's largest taxable grand list. We defend neighborhood zoning and oppose the state's Democrat regulations to develop high-rise buildings, like Democrats, while we support Greenwich communities with all units providing affordable housing. Republicans recognize that nearly half the town's population is lower income or seniors living on fixed incomes. For young families, we support a recognized public school system of education excellence with the best funded schools in Connecticut and 11 neighborhood elementary schools. And for seniors, age-friendly Greenwich and Nathaniel Witherell and tax relief. Republicans support expediting environmental remediation, drainage system improvements to reduce neighborhood flooding, aging sewer system upgrades, 4 libraries, and a network of parks, beaches, swimming pool, ferry boats, and golf course. Your vote for the entire BET Republican ticket on Row B will keep Greenwich affordable and the best place to work, raise a family, and retire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now back to the Democratic side. Excuse me, Matt Deschamps.
In this very room, I've witnessed residents from across the political spectrum come before the BET, expressing their concerns on critical issues that affect us all. Our schools, our safety, our environment, our quality of life. Taxpayers rightfully want to be heard, but time and again, the Republican-controlled BET has refused to listen. This is a new phenomenon in Greenwich, and not in keeping with the best traditions of bipartisan cooperation. The current Finance Board is instead fixated on a dogmatic political ideology that spreads disinformation to confuse and distract, when what we need is sound fiscal management and a strong vision for the future. Unfortunately, these Republican candidates have misled our community with their misinformation. Supersized schools. A new OGS will cost the same as a renovated one. CMS should only cost $67.5 million. Your taxes will increase 50%. High rises? And worst of all, scaring parents about unfounded hazards to their children's health. If Old Greenwich School renovation commences, it's inexcusable. These statements are false. This irresponsible rhetoric has cost us dearly as a community. Unsafe schools, broken fire trucks, $1.6 billion in backlog capital projects, and costly delays resulting in not one school at a time, but 0 schools at a time. Keeping taxes low is a top priority of Democratic slate, and we are sensitive to Greenwich residents at all stages of life and income levels. And at the same time, we can allow parents to send their kids to safe, healthy, ADA-compliant schools, ensure fire trucks are available at a time of need, and homeowners are protected from costly and disruptive flooding. This election is about values and leadership. And on November 7th, you have a clear choice. You can vote for leadership that has brought this town crumbling schools, broken fire trucks, and costly delay, or you can elect a Democratic slate of financial experts who have the vision to deliver the infrastructure and services this town needs. We ask for your vote on November 7th.
Thank you. And now on the Republican side, Harry Fisher, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you to the League. Greenwich Republicans have an almost 100-year history of leadership of the town's finances. Our efforts have ensured superior financial management, a strong AAA bond rating, attractive schools, parks, and town facilities, and a strong real estate market. Many have claimed that the BET is not adequately funding public safety. That simply is not true. In the past 4 years, we've invested $6.5 million in fire and police equipment. In addition, the new GEM Station 4 was brought to fruition by Republicans. With respect to school funding, the conversation that we do not fund schools is absolutely false. The BET under Republican leadership has funded every reasonable school building and project requested by the Board of Ed. Plus, we invest in our teachers and kids, which at $27,000 per pupil is the highest in the state. We have also been committed to other major projects such as the Cohen Eastern Greenwich Civic Center and field remediation at Greenwich High and Western Middle Schools. The BOE, the Board of Ed, took almost 7 years to get approval to remediate the fields, and we have to date funded $20 million to begin the remediation. Only the BOE can answer why it took so long to get approvals, especially when the Greenwich High School remediation, run by the DPW, not the BOE, moved a lot faster. Republican leadership on the BET is invested in our town and our schools and are committed to maintaining the town as a great place to live, raise a family, and retire. We ask that you vote for all 6 of us on November 7th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's wait till we're all finished. All right, next we're back to the Democrats. Elliot Olczyk, your 2 minutes. Is your mic on?
I love Greenwich. I love everything about Greenwich. I love our natural beauty, our shoreline, our parks. But the thing I love most about Greenwich is the people, including our opponents and our community. To be sure, Democrats have a very different vision than our opponents. Our vision is based upon our pride in our town, and we believe most people share this vision to keep Greenwich excellent and amazing. Let me highlight 3 important ways we differ. First, we support our schools, our kids, families, and property values. We repeatedly voted in favor of financing Central Middle and Old Greenwich schools, and our opponents have repeatedly denied funding. That's a well-documented fact. Secondly, we want to avoid catastrophe risk. Much of our infrastructure in our town has exceeded its useful life, and we want to avoid something bad happening. I'm principally talking about avoiding people being hurt, but there are financial consequences as well. Most importantly, we want to keep taxes low. Although our opponents have often raised our budget and taxes, we haven't gotten value for our money. Each year we delay in purchasing infrastructure, like CMS or fire trucks, the price goes up. They simply have failed to keep our costs as low as they could be and should be. Your taxes will be lower with Democrats than they will be with our opponents. So yes, we have very different visions. We want to run our town like a well-run company, move with urgency, and keep our taxes low. Their strategy is to delay and deny, which ultimately costs more money, resulting in higher taxes. So if you love Greenwich, as I do, if you take pride in our reputation and want to keep our infrastructure excellent and our taxes low, the choice is clear. Vote for all the fiscally prudent Democratic candidates.
Time is up. Thank you. And lastly, we have Karen Fasiliotis with your 2-minute closing statement.
Led by Republicans, the BET has helped create one of the most desirable communities in the country, if not the world. The cornerstone is funding all our town services and infrastructure without overburdening our taxpayers. Your vote for all 6 Republican candidates for the BET will ensure this will continue. We do listen to our neighbors, and increasing property taxes and user fees are the concerns most often heard from those who live in our town. Many wealthy residents, like my Democratic colleagues, don't worry about big jumps in taxes, but there are a lot of young families and elderly residents, often unheard, who can't tolerate annual tax increases of 5% or more. I've heard from them. A $100 tax increase to fund our town government doesn't seem so bad when taken on its own. I've heard it said it's just the cost of a cup of coffee every month. But think about that. Many small increases, when added up over time, leads to thousands of dollars in additional tax burden to our residents. Our opponents want an unlimited credit card and propose expanding town services and expenditures in a huge spending spree. Their policy of taking on millions upon millions of long-term debt with high interest rates will result in future higher taxes and bring us in line with our Westchester neighbors. Republican leadership will not champion this type of policy that over time would decimate our real estate values and drive out our more moderate income neighbors. Republican fiscal leadership and discipline have made Greenwich a premier destination to live without sacrificing the quality of services our residents have come to expect. We don't have crumbling buildings in our town. That's all fear-mongering. And we also believe in strong schools and good infrastructure. I ask that you vote for all 6 Republican candidates for the BET on Row B this September 7th. Thank you.
On behalf of the League, I want to extend my thanks to all of the candidates for your willingness to participate this evening, and to you in the audience for coming. Don't forget to vote on November 7th.